Yeah, the way of the Weeble, so you can really knock it around. Because
Weeble's
it's not true. Right? That's the message. Never trust a Weeble. Remember Weebles?
Yeah.
Right? Because the kids are gone, so they don't know from this.
Right.
But chances are you remember Weebles, Fisher-Price toy, 1970s, I think. And their motto was,
Weebles wobble, but they don't fall down.
Weebles wobble, but they don't fall down. So that's the underlying theme. And let's see where it takes us. So I used to host a conference every year. I did it for 5 years in La Jolla, California. And the conference featured, it was a weekend thing, and it featured numbers of speakers each year. But all of whom were in the school of non-duality. So non-dual, Advaita, sadly Casey isn't sitting here, but that non-dual Hinduism school that Eckhart Tolle represents, even though he doesn't call it that. Ramana Maharshi is usually considered the founder in the modern age of that school. Anyway, I was the host, so we had all these speakers, and even though each person had her own approach, Gangaji being the most famous woman on the stage over the 5 years, while each of them had their own approach, they were all coming from this non-dual perspective. And the non-dual perspective isn't the perspective of unity, that everything is one, because as soon as you say everything is one, you've already entered into dualism. And then there's one and then there's two, or there's the singular and the multiple. Non-duality is that greater embracing term that embraces one and the many in a greater unity, if that makes any sense, and hopefully it will as we go along. So one year we had Gangaji and Eckhart Tolle for the weekend, among other people who I can't remember because they weren't famous. And we broke for lunch. And I'm just walking to, I don't know, probably IHOP was where I usually ended up in La Jolla. We're walking for lunch. There's different places to go. And I'm with a small group of people who are among the 550 participants. And about a block ahead of us is Gangaji and Eckhart Tolle. So I like Gangaji. I hate Eckhart Tolle. It's just a personal thing. I don't necessarily disagree with what he says. I don't usually understand what he says. But that's not my area of animosity toward Eckhart Tolle. I hate Eckhart Tolle because my second book was a book about Ecclesiastes. And it was published by Harper San Francisco, which no longer exists. And they sent me on a book tour. And part of the book tour was to be in San Francisco. And my first talk in San Francisco was at lunch in a Barnes & Noble, and it was about 100 people. And I thought, wow, this is amazing. For my first book, which is a Random House book, I would get 10 people, 20 people, 100 people at lunchtime. That night, they took me to this huge conference convention center, and the place was packed. There were hundreds of cars, and in my mind I'm going, well, it's California, no one would dare drive by themselves. So there's got to be 200, 400 more people there. And I walked in, I could barely get in because my head was, so I walked in, and there's a woman waiting for me at the door, and I step into the auditorium, and it was packed. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people. And I'm going, I have made it. I mean, this is it. And as I'm walking in, expecting all these accolades, this young woman who's my handler comes over and says, oh no, Rabbi, that's not for you. There are 6 people waiting to talk to you. And I said, well, who's this? And they said, oh, that's Eckhart Tolle. Damn you, Eckhart Tolle. So we're walking to lunch, and there's Eckhart Tolle and Gangaji walking ahead of us. And they're deep in conversation, and some guy who's walking beside me says, look, there's Gangaji and Eckhart Tolle. I wonder what enlightened people talk about. And then he looked at me and he said, "Oh, I'm sorry, Rabbi, are you enlightened also?" So you can't really answer that question. Because if you say yes, then clearly you're not. If you say no, you might be implying you are, but you're too enlightened to admit it, right? So I just said, I just laughed. I didn't really try to answer that question, because it's a nuts old question, crazy question. But since he raised it, I was curious. What do enlightened people talk about? A few weeks later, Gangaji and I were in Tucson, Arizona, and we were at someone's house for lunch. And I reminded her of the weekend, and I told her the story that I just told you. And I said, "So what were you and Eckert talking about?" And she said, "We were complaining about our publishing contracts." And that's when I knew I was enlightened. Because if that's what enlightened people talk about, I do that. So I actually became enlightened when I was 16 years old. And I had just been introduced to Zen. So you have a Zen group on Wednesdays? Someone say that again. So if you're serious, you should disband it. But anyway, it's not Zen. So I was really into Zen. I had studied Buddhism and Hinduism in high school with these two teachers who had gone to India on a grant, and they came back all excited about what they called Asian civilization. You couldn't call it religion because it was public high school, so they taught Asian civilization, which was Buddhism and Hinduism, Taoism and Confucianism. And I was totally taken with Zen Buddhism. And I read every book I could find on it. And I practiced the meditation Zazen as I got it from a book. And I was really serious about it, as you can be when you're 16 reading a book. And it was the summer between my junior and senior year. I'm meditating on the shores of this lake in Cape Cod, Massachusetts. And something happened. I don't know what, because I wasn't there when it happened. But Rami just sort of disappeared. When Rami came back, I had this sense of overwhelming connectedness to everything, and a love for and from everything, and I was laughing hysterically. And I decided, oh, that's enlightenment. whatever that was, that's enlightenment. I tried for the next 10 years to get it back, to have that experience again. And this time I moved from Zen from books to Zen from Zen masters. I started with Philip Kapleau from the first Zen Center in Rochester, New York, but I ended up, I spent most of my time with Joshu Suzaki Roshi, who was Leonard Cohen's Zen master. Leonard Cohen was the Jiki-Jitsu when I started, meaning he was the second in command of the retreats. So I got to know him as a student of Zen, not as a performer. But I ended up with a student of Suzaki Roshi's named Geshen, who was a German woman who Suzaki Roshi refused to acknowledge was enlightened because she was a woman, and that he felt he was really traditional Japanese, and there were at least two groups of people who could not become enlightened: women and Americans. He was sure Americans would never get Zen, though he lived, in America. So I was, deeply immersed in this, and one of the things that all these Zen teachers insisted upon was the Zen teaching: when hungry, eat; when tired, sleep; but above all, don't wobble. I thought, all right, that's really enlightened living. Don't wobble, be grounded. And that's when I realized, no, I'm not enlightened, because wobbling is what I do, right? So, when I'm hungry, I eat and I watch MSNBC, and then when that makes me sick, I switch over to CNN, which is sort of like a palliative kind of thing. I rarely shift to Fox, because I just can't afford the blood pressure medicine. I don't just eat, I'm always doing something else. Even when I'm sleeping, I'm not just sleeping. I'm dreaming. All these things are going through my mind. So I realized I'm not enlightened. When hungry, eat and do something else. When tired, sleep, but also something else is going on. my way is the way of the Weeble. I wobble. But I think you can wobble, not discounting the guy falling off the edge, that you can wobble without falling down. And I think it's not when hungry, eat, when tired, sleep, but above all, don't wobble. I think it's when hungry, eat, when tired, sleep, and don't freak out about wobbling. Because wobbling is what the mind does. If you try to control your thoughts, I think you're going to lose. If you try to control your feelings, I think you're going to lose. If you try to control anything, ultimately you're going to lose. Because it's not in our control. Reality just happens, and we can observe it, we can be aware of it, but we don't control it. We're not responsible for it. Even if you are planning to vote for Marianne Williamson, you're not going to be able to think her into the Oval Office. Right? It's not going to work. We don't control reality that way. So what can we do? So the first thing is you have to give yourself a break. You have to get off the notion that you can make this happen. Now, when I was in the Zen world, we would be sitting in these retreats, rigid, unmoving, silent, and every once in a while, Sasaki Roshi would just yell out something like, your life depends on this, or awake now because you're going to die. He'd just throw these supposedly motivational phrases out to us, which just used to just shock me awake because I usually was dozing while I was And with that as a goad, I continually failed. I don't believe you can wake yourself up. I mean, first of all, you are yourself. So if you're asleep, there's no one else there to wake you up. I don't think you have that capacity. But I was taught that you did. So I worked at it for 10 years until I was just completely depressed. I don't know if that's really the right word, not clinically, but just completely convinced that I was incapable of being a Buddhist, or being a Zen Buddhist anyway. And I contacted my Zen teacher. So there was Sasaki Roshi, and then there was Leonard Cohen on the retreats. But then there was a Japanese guy, Tetsu Uno, who was a PhD professor in Buddhist studies at Smith College, with whom I studied for 2 years. And I called him up, and I said, I don't understand. I'm doing, he ran a Zendo at Smith every day. I was the janitor. I set up the cushions in the morning. I broke it down when we were done. We met every morning, Monday to Friday, 6 o'clock in the morning, and then we had Buddhist studies class at 8. And I did everything he taught me. So I called him up and I said, I've been doing everything you told me to do for 10 years. And nothing's happening. And he says, okay, now you understand. I understand what? It doesn't work. It doesn't work. I said, what do you mean it doesn't work? He says, well, if you want to understand that, you got to come and see me. I was living in Miami, Florida. He's in Northampton, Massachusetts. And I flew up because Massachusetts is where I'm from. My family is all there. That we live within 40 minutes of Northampton. So I went, I visited my parents, I borrowed a car, I drove up to see him. And he says it again, he says, it doesn't work. You cannot meditate your way to enlightenment. You can't think your way to enlightenment. There is no path to reality, because this is reality. And Krishnamurti has that phrase, the truth is a pathless land. And the idea is, it's not that you can't get there, it's that you can't not be there. There's no path to reality, there's no path to truth, there's no path to enlightenment, there's just where you are now. And the truth and the reality and the enlightenment is present right now. You may or may not be awake to it, but it's not someplace you have to go. Jesus says the same thing, right? Jesus says, if they come and tell you that the kingdom is in the sky, the birds will get there. before you do. If they tell you it's across the sea, the fish will get there. He's paraphrasing what Moses says in the book of Deuteronomy. Moses says, if you think that the truth is in the heavens, then who's going to fly up and bring it back to you? Because you can't get up there. And if you think it's across the sea, who's going to cross the oceans to bring it back to you? You can't get there. Jesus says it's within you. Moses says it's in your heart and on it's on your heart and in your mouth that you may experience it. There's nowhere to go. All practice is, in fact, an exercise it's a practice of failure. Right? All practice is a practice of failure. Unless, as long as your practice is to get you from point A to point B. If your practice is just because I like it, right? If you like to do zazen, which is just sitting meditation, shikantaza is the purest form of zazen, where you're just sitting and you're aware of whatever. So it's like vipassana, like mindfulness. If you're just sitting and you enjoy sitting, then sit. But if you're sitting in order to become enlightened, go mow the lawn or something. Do something constructive, because that isn't going to get you anywhere. So I'm talking to the professor, and the professor says, just what I'm saying to you, it doesn't work. I said, well, what does? And he says, nothing does. Work is the problem. It isn't about work. It's about what the Chinese call wei wu wei. And that literally means acting, not acting. Alan Watts has the best translation, I think, of it, not, as I understand it, non-coercive action. You do what you have to do, but you're not doing it to coerce an outcome. You're, again, to use Watts, it's like playing jazz. There's an underlying rhythm, and you're just riffing off of that. And it's fun. But you're not going to change the underlying rhythm. You're just finding your way to work with it. It's like if you go swimming, and if you don't know how to swim, and you find yourself dropped into a swimming pool, and you panic, and you flail around, you'll drown. But if you can just let the water hold you up, you'll survive. There's no work involved. There is, in a sense, surrender, but even that is work. Right? So if you're in a 12-step program, we turn our lives or our problems over to God as we understand God. I mean, it sounds like a nice idea, except if you could do that, you wouldn't be in an addiction program, right? You wouldn't, and the God of your understanding is just that. It's your understanding. I'm just turning my problem over to an imaginary thing that I invented. That's not going to help me any. Ultimately, what works is not surrendering, but being surrendered by reality itself. Realizing that you can't fix this. You can't change reality. You can only learn to wobble without falling over. But like with the Weeble, oh look, now he's Jewish. he's doing this little davening thing, where they rock back and forth. The coming back to center with the Weeble isn't that the Weeble is trying to do that. It's just the nature of the character itself that wobbles and then doesn't. So the question becomes, all right, how do we make it part of our nature to wobble and yet not fall down? As soon as you say, how can I make it, you know you're wrong. You're going to lose. All right, so there's no real good language for this. But the Weeble is built for that reality. My suggestion is, so are you and I. That we are built for wobbling, and we are built for coming back to center. And it's not an either or. There's wobbling time and there's centering time. And there's wobbling time and there's centering time. And there's no way to just be in one state or the other. Our lives, just from the nature of who we are as beings, our lives are a dance between wobbling and centering. can we work with our innate capacity to wobble and center? Can we work with that? And I know the word work is problematic, but can we work with that in order to keep from falling down? So and now I know there's a paradox there, which is either because I know I'm not thinking clearly, or because language breaks down. If you agree with me, you'll go with, oh, language breaks down. If you think I'm crazy, you're not being consistent. So I'm going to go with language breaks down and not overthink my choice of words. But I think there is a way to come to center. Wobbling just comes with it. That's easy, right? Wobbling just happens all the time. What can we do to cultivate the quality of coming back to center? When I first, my first year in the rabbinate, 1981, I'm living in Miami, Florida. And I've got a small congregation, and I started it myself. I'd been in the Air Force, loved the Air Force. Friends of mine convinced me to leave the Air Force and sit alone with them in a room, hoping other people would show up. And not just show up, but pay dues. Right? The little box next to Larry is nice, but in a synagogue you have dues. So I agreed to do it. So that's how I ended up in Miami. But I had a lot of free time on my hands because it took a long time before we got enough people to actually make this a viable operation. So I would help out in other areas, volunteer different places, and I got called in by Jewish Federation, working with a social worker, to work with an Orthodox Jewish family on Miami Beach. Their situation was, it was a young parents, young, I mean I'm in my late 60s, so it seems young to me now, but they were probably in their 40s. They had a 16-year-old son who was born with some horrible disease and was dying from it. He was right on track. He lived about, they expected, he had a life expectancy of mid-teens, and he was 16 and he was dying. And on his own, and I don't know how, he decided that meditation was going to help him. And the only meditation he could learn about was from a guru named Muktananda. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but Swami Muktananda had a large presence in South Florida back then, maybe he still does. And I was very close to one of the Swamis of his movement, and we would share on Friday night. He would come to our synagogue, and on special events he would invite me, and I would go to their center. So I was pretty familiar with Muktananda. Somehow this kid became familiar with Muktananda. He was doing this Hindu meditation, which freaked out his Orthodox Jewish parents. They didn't, oh, this is not good, right? This is not right. So they spoke to the social worker, and the social worker contacted me and said, work with the parents, not the kid so much. The kid was not, I mean, he's dying, but other than that, he was handling things pretty well. And I said, work with the parents, because they're freaking out that their son is involved in Hinduism. Actually, he was just meditating. He was chanting Om Namah Shivaya as the central chant of Siddha Yoga, Muktananda's movement. But they said, oh, he's becoming a Hindu, this is really bad, we're Orthodox Jews, can't let this happen, he certainly can't die a Hindu. To add more suffering onto the kid's life, not only were his parents resistant to the one thing that was seemingly giving him some solace, but he had only 2 friends in the world, and they were his cousins, and also Orthodox Jews. And his cousins' parents, so his aunt and uncle, his cousins' parents decided that a loving God would not give this horrible disease to a good human being. This must be punishment for something this 16-year-old boy had done. But certainly not in this life, because he was born with this disease. And there is a strand of Judaism that accepts reincarnation. And they said, so, his disease demonstrates and proves that he must have been an evil person in a past life. And this is God's justice. And on the off chance that you can pass evil from one person to the next, they forbade their two sons to have anything to do with their cousin. And they were his closest friends, and then they weren't. That last year of his life, he had no friends. He had his parents who were freaked out about his meditation, he had his social worker, and he had me. This kid was in a difficult place besides just dying. So I work with his parents, I work with him to give him some support. The meditation is fine. I try to show the parents that meditation is part of Judaism, which it is. And they were, okay, fine. They would have come around anyway. I don't think it's anything I said. They loved their son, and eventually it would have dawned on them that anything that helps him die with some grace is fine with them. I think they would have come around. In any case, we're at the end of his life in the story, and we're sitting in the hospital, his social worker, his parents, and myself. He's unconscious in bed, and he's been unconscious for a long time. And we're just waiting. There's no conversation going on. We're just sort of, as I remember it, we're just sort of looking at him. Like, for some reason. And because there's nothing there. He seems, he's breathing, obviously, but he's not really he's not conscious as far as we can tell. Then all of a sudden, he pops up in bed. Something that I didn't think he was capable of, physically capable of doing, just pops up in bed. And he looks at each of us, right in the face, right in the eye. He's got this beatific smile on his face. And he says, I found it. And he dies. So, the social worker and his parents are like in awe, and you can see the tears are forming in their eyes. Not me. I jump on the kid's bed. I grab him. What? What did you find? Get back! Get back! Okay. I didn't do that. But I wanted to do that. I just didn't have the courage to do that. So he's dead. But what did he find? My sense is he found the center. Right? He came back at the end of his life. He came back to center. Now, he may have done that multiple times while he was alive, I don't know. But in the Jewish tradition, as well as others, but in the Jewish tradition, there is a teaching that when you die, when anyone dies, you die awake. Not physically awake, but spiritually awake. And I'll tell you what you're awake to in a second, but you die completely centered. And what it's called in Judaism, it's called the kiss of God. And they take the idea from the book of Genesis. So in Genesis chapter 2, God creates the human being by blowing consciousness into the nostrils of the person. And so the rabbi said, okay, that's how we become aware. The divine exhales into us and we become conscious. When we die, God, according to their poetic understanding, when we die, God kisses us on the mouth and takes that breath back. So we sigh into and die into God. Now, this is from the Kabbalistic perspective, so we're not talking about a supernatural being with a beard, and it's not like that. God is the universe, and the universe animates us, and then the universe takes the animation back. The universe breathes consciousness into us, and then the universe takes that breath back with our last breath. And according to the Kabbalah, according to these mystics, at the moment of that exhalation back into God, there is absolute awakening and knowing. And they say it's a sense of ecstasy. Now, they don't know from Sanskrit, but if they did, they would use, I think, the Sanskrit term Sat Chit Ananda. It's an experience of pure being, pure consciousness, pure bliss, and then you die. The you that dies is the ego, but the deeper you that you are is the reality itself. But their kid is gone. I think that's what he realized at the end. I think that's what meditation, just to pick on one thing for a second, that's what meditation can do for us. It's what the Sufis call dying before you die. In other words, coming back to center and realizing your truest nature before the end of your life. So you come back to center, you realize your truest nature, and then you lose it again, because nothing is permanent, and then you go back to wobbling again. But then you come back to center again, and then you go back to wobbling again. So meditation is one way to do that, and that's how he was doing it. The meditation he was doing was Siddha Yoga, so he was using the mantra, Om Namah Shivaya. In my own studies, but also my own practice, I think it was more the mantra than the meditation that allows him to come back to center. Not everybody can meditate, meaning sitting on a chair or on a cushion and just, being present. Not everyone can do that. But everyone, almost maybe, but almost everyone, can repeat a word or phrase as a mantra in their heads. There's nothing magical about the mantra. Right? Om Namah Shivaya is the one they use in Siddha Yoga. When I was initiated into the Ramakrishna order of Advaita Vedanta Hinduism, the guru gave me a mantra, which I'm not supposed to repeat, and I've never repeated it. The guy's Bengali accent was so extreme, I don't even know what it was that he gave me, or I wouldn't know what it was, except my own personal Rami was hiding behind a curtain in the supposedly empty room where I and the guru were talking, going through this ritual, and I was receiving my mantra. Behind a big curtain, my Swami was hiding. And so that afterwards he said, let me tell you what he said. The Swami was from Texas, and he spoke fluent Bengali and could not just translate what the guru said, but tell me what the mantra was in an accent I could understand. But there's nothing magical about the mantra. I mean, the guru thought there was, or that's the implication. The reason I think they tell you not to tell what your mantra is. If you ever did TM, they tell you the same thing, don't repeat your mantra, it's just for you. No, it's the Swami has X number of mantra that the Swami knows, and he has to give them out over and over and over again, and doesn't want anyone to know that, so he says, shh, don't tell anybody. There's probably millions of people with the same mantra I have. I don't think there's anything magical about the words. There's something powerful about repetition. And you could say Om Namah Shivaya, you could say pepperoni pizza. I don't think it matters. I mean, Jews shouldn't say pepperoni pizza because it's not kosher, but other than that, I don't think it's the magic isn't in the words. The power of the practice is in the practice itself, is in the repetition. If you can find a word that works for you, and I'll talk about that in a second. If you can find a word that works for you, it allows for the wobbling, and it brings you back to center. So let me give you an example. One of my big wobbles in life, I can't do it because this guy will fall off the leg. One of my biggest wobbles in life is standing in a line. Does that bother anybody? Because it really bothers me. If I go to a buffet, and there's a long line, I just won't eat. I just can't stand in the line. And I won't cut in front, right? But I just won't stand in line. When I go to the bank, I live in Murfreesboro. When I go to the bank, if there's a line at the bank, I start getting, my heart rate goes up, and I'm having palpitations, and I'm getting annoyed. And every once in a while, I think it's like anti-Semitic. I think it's like I'm the only Jew in the town. Here comes the Jew. Everyone line up. Let's make them line up. I can't prove that. I just. So one time I went to visit my parents when they used to winter in Florida. So I go down, I'm visiting my mom and dad. They were retired. The only thing that they did besides my dad golfed, they played cards at night. Their big event during the day was going to the dollar store. And they would always have something to go to the dollar store for. They'd have like a whole list of items that they needed, but they'd only get one on each visit, so they had some place to go every day. So I went them on the daily pilgrimage to the dollar store. My mother needed a greeting card. So she reads through every card on the rack, finds the one she wants, gives it to me and says, go pay for the card. I'm going out with your father. We're going to sit in the car. It's too hot in the dollar store. We're going to crank up the AC in the car. I said, okay, fine. So I'm in a line. It's not too bad. I'm doing a mitzvah, a good deed, you know, I'm buying the card for my mom. And everything's going on fine until all of a sudden the cashier leans into that crackly, you know, microphone and she goes, price check, price check. Price check? It's the dollar store. What's the price check? It's $1. I mean, everyone knows it's $1. And I'm sitting there, I'm standing there, and I'm getting, now the line is stuck. And I'm going, what do you want to, out loud, but soft. I want to speak just loudly enough to make everyone else riot. That's it. What is her problem? It's $1. Everyone knows it's $1. It's a dollar store. If you don't know the price, go outside, look at the sign, dollar store. Now what she meant was she needed the SKU number, the item number, not the price. Everyone knows it's $1. And it took about 10-15 minutes to find someone else in the store because she couldn't leave the register. And I don't know if there was another worker in the store. They may have to go out, hire someone, train them. I don't know. It seemed like it was taking that long. And I'm going nuts, waiting in line, but I can't leave because I gotta come out with the car. Then all of a sudden, I remember the mantra. So I have multiple mantra from different teachers. And one I use regularly. It's in Hebrew, but I'll give you the English. In Hebrew, it's Echad, Yachid, Umiyuchad. In English, the poetic English translation is one, every single one, each one joined and united in the one. Not with the one, but in the one. The one is the greater God. So I start singing it in my head. And immediately, because I've been doing this a long time, it's Pavlovian, immediately I change physiologically. Right? My breathing gets more normal, my heart rate goes down, my blood pressure goes back to normal. I'm not tense, I'm not tight, I'm just chanting. I'm no longer a victim of anti-Semitic lionism. I'm just in a system that's breaking down, and I'll just chant, and I become literally a much nicer person. By the time I get to the cashier, she's freaking out because she knows everyone's angry, and she's caught in the system and she doesn't want to be blamed and everyone's kind of like grumbly. But when I got there, I was like Gandhi. You know, like, it's okay, everything's fine. You know? And I realized that, you know, we're all in this together, it's just the way the system goes, it's just part of the wobbling of life. I didn't blame her, I wasn't taking it personally. I paid for the card, and as I engaged with her from that place of centeredness, she relaxed also, you could see. That's the power of mantra, is to find that sound that will bring you back to center. So the key is simply to find your word. Now, I can't give you one. In the Christian tradition, it's usually a one-syllable word, but not exclusively. So, God, grace, peace, love, something like that. If you want to use a different language, you can look up mantra on the internet and find many mantra. Find one that works for you. In the Jewish tradition, you know it works because you're supposed to do it as often as you can, day to day, for 40 days. If you make it to 40 days, it's so drilled into your head that you can't forget it. If you don't make it to 40 days, if you forget to do it on the 39th day, it's not your fault, it's the wrong word. So you can find another word. So what I'm encouraging, your homework, is to find a mantra, find a word that speaks to you, and then just repeat it in the back of your mind as often as you can throughout the day. And see if that doesn't help you with your wobbling and bringing you back to center. All right, I'm going to stop there. We're going to go, we have second hour, we're going to do conversation. We can go into this more. So I'll leave him here, and I'll talk to you later. Thank you.